Our guests today are Mel Shaw and Pearl Shaw. They are from Saad&Shaw that was started in 2004. They brought both of their practices together, and they work closely together as a husband and wife team, and help nonprofits, HBCUs, and others do fundraising and capital campaigns in particular, or major gifts and capital campaigns in particular. What brought them on my screen was I love Twitter, and they use Twitter well. And Pearl's been doing interviews with fundraisers through the COVID-19 crisis, trying to figure out, how are people, just talking to people, how are you doing fundraising? And I love their experience in the field. They've been doing this for a while. They had experience before they started in 2004. Mel had been doing fundraising consulting and nonprofit consulting, and Pearl had been doing writing and helping people with communications. So they're just a dynamic duo. Super excited to introduce them to the Nonprofit Storytelling Conference family. And they are the authors of 4 books, which you'll see at the end. But there's books on leadership, fundraising fundamentals, and there's a couple others that I'm not able to read right now. But I know you're going to want to look at those. So just as a teaser for the last slide in this deck, we go through that. I don't want to take up any more of your time. Would you? Thank you so much for being here, you two. And is it cool if we get started, Pearl?
Yes, let's go. We'll just start by saying welcome to everybody that's joining the webinar. We're just grateful to be with you. We know this is a time of change. We wouldn't necessarily call it crisis. We are calling it change. And we've talked with different clients, and they've said the change has happened. Now we're in transition. And that's that call to be responsive. As nonprofits, how do we respond to the communities we serve and the communities that we could be or should be serving? So we've got an environment of change. We've got, a global pandemic. We have the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, and the way that call has just taken off across the country, across the globe, by people that nobody anticipated would go out and stay out in numbers to say really clearly, just Black Lives Matter. So we want to talk about, what about capital campaigns or major gift campaigns in this environment? Are there things that we should all know about? So we're going to share with you our thoughts, and let's go to the next slide.
Oh, and here you guys are.
Oh, here we are. So I think we've covered that slide.
Hey guys.
So we want to frame the conversation in terms of the answers that you're going to get about how to proceed will really come from the questions that you ask. So what we're going to just talk briefly about in this presentation is, no matter your role, whether you're a board member, a trustee, executive director, president, you're a staff member, advancement person, volunteer, no matter what official role that you have, there's questions that you can ask. And so we're just suggesting that people look at these questions and find the right ways to ask them. Because as you ask these questions and build consensus around them, you'll know and you'll learn how to go forward or not to go forward with major gifts campaign or your capital campaign. So next slide, please. I just want to run through these 5 questions. We're really only going to focus on a few points, but we wanted to let you know that work at this time, fundraising at this time, needs to respond to the environment, and it needs to still be rooted in fundraising fundamentals and good practices. So when we think about questions that you want to raise within your organization, is whatever the campaign is that you're in the midst of or that you're considering, do all aspects of our organization support this campaign? Take the pulse of the organization. You may have been in one position 3 months ago, and you may be in a different position now. Have that open and honest conversation and find out within your leadership, is there still consensus? Related to that would be number 2, is our case for support still relevant? So if you are planning for a major gifts campaign or a capital campaign, or you're in the midst of one, we know that you have a case or we would sure hope you have a case, and if you don't, you can do that now. But is it still relevant? And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So you want to just look at the fundamentals, again, your mission, goals, and fundraising priorities. Next slide, please. Two very important questions that are super relevant to today, but again, they relate to general best practices, would be, how do we know about our donors and funders' priorities and how they are responding to COVID-19 and the movement for Black lives? As a nonprofit organization dependent so often on contributed income, you need to think about and you need to learn by picking up the phone and talking with people. What are our donors and funders' priorities at this point in time? Priorities are changing. So you want to know, what about your current donors and funders and perhaps those who you might want to engage? Number 4 is, again, critically important to this point in time. You need to ask yourselves as an organization and the depth and breadth of your organization, what will be different for us as a result of COVID-19 and the Black Lives Matter movement? It's very clear that the world has changed. So how are we transitioning, whether that's delivery of services or education or advocacy work? What will be different? What is different? And how are we going to move forward? Next slide, please. And then the 5th question is, has our relevancy increased or decreased? Do we need to change how we operate? And do we have the capacity and infrastructure to respond to our community? And I think that relates very much to the impacts of COVID-19 and to the movement for Black lives. So for many organizations, especially those that are Black-led, Black-serving, their relevancy has radically increased. Organizations who funders too often overlooked or would not consider for a long list of reasons, which can go under the category of structural or institutional racism, now are suddenly being elevated because people within philanthropy are hearing that cry, Black Lives Matter. At the same time, organizations may be facing cuts, they may be facing increase of people they need to serve in terms of COVID-19 and responding to that. The pandemic is not over, the economic challenges are not over, and will be long continuing, let alone health effects. So those are important questions to have as an organizational-wide conversation. Next slide. So before we go into this, I know I covered those 5 questions, but we just feel it's important with fundraising that you always retain and sustain, and as necessary, build consensus around your fundraising. Because if your team isn't in order, if your board is divided, if board feels one way, staff feels another way, people will know. Nothing stays within the house. People will know, so take time to build consensus and to ask hard questions. I think this is a time in our country where people are being much more fearless. People are fearless in asking hard questions, and you can ask hard questions too. It's part of our responsibility to our organizations, to our communities, and patriotically to our country. So we really want to stress that about opening up conversation. So let's go into one of these points we want to cover in more depth, and that's relevancy. Is our case for support still relevant? So elements of the case for support is your mission. So for some organizations, it's appropriate to ask, do we need to revisit our mission? That's not about being knee-jerk, we're going to move where the market moves, but it's about thoughtful questioning about what is our role, what are our services, who are we at this point in time? The goals for fundraising. The question to ask yourself is, do these speak to needs that have emerged over the past 3 months? So If you've had a campaign that already has set goals, but you have other needs that have developed, or you feel that what you had thought was important is no longer as important, take the time to look at your case and see what are you asking people for money for. And then anticipated impact. That's another part of your case. Always you want to tell people what will be different as a result of our fundraising. So you need to just think, is that relevant? What you're seeking to achieve within your community or nationally? Is that a priority? Is that relevant? And what we'd also know is that things that are time sensitive, they do not overlap that long-term planning. So if you're engaging in a campaign that's about long-term building of your organization or institution, talk about it within the context of today and the context of tomorrow. And then fundraising priorities. Are these the right priorities for this moment in time? Some organizations may find they had not anticipated doing a major gifts campaign, but that what has happened in terms of the people that they serve or advocate for, that they actually have a need for additional funds and that they should go after major gifts. They should invite people to the table. One of the reasons people don't give is they haven't been asked. So if your ask is relevant, talk to your donors. Let's go to the next slide. Market knowledge. Oh my gosh, have you talked with your donors and funders? So one thing we'll say all the time is talk to your donors. Pick up the phone, ask them. We did an interview recently with some of the fundraisers at Menorah Medical College, and the big thing they said is they got on the phones right away, and they started calling all their donors. The first question is, how are you? How is, at that point, it was just COVID-19, which was enormous. And, you know, how are you? How is this impacting you? How is this impacting you as a medical professional? What are you seeing? How are you doing? Updating them on what was going on with the college. So that's the same thing that we advocate for everybody. Stay in touch. Yes, Twitter is good, email is good, newsletters are good. Pick up the phone. We're at the end of the day, we are still people, and people want to hear from people. This is especially critical with your major donors, whether they are new, lapsed, or people you were and are in conversation with. Bring them into the family and then ask them, you know, how are you responding to COVID-19 and the movement for Black lives? How has this impacted your giving? How has it impact, you know, what you're thinking about and how you relate to the world and your position in the world? So talk. Next slide, please. And again, that conversation, that constitutes market knowledge. So we just ask, we always say, don't just jump into fundraising. We're really important about planning. So if you had a capital campaign or a major gifts campaign in the works, we would hope that you would have done a feasibility study, whether that's formal or informal. What did you know about how your donors or funders responded to your priorities about 3 months ago? And then again, with your current conversations, how do you feel these are updated? But we just say, take a minute to look at what did people say earlier, because while the world is changing, there's so many other priorities that remain, you know, critical and or urgent or just important needs. So just look back and see, how do people want to support you, and use that as a reference. All right, next slide, please. Finally, and importantly, and this ties back to the 5 questions, is to take time for a conversation within the organization. What will be different for us as a result of COVID-19 and the Black Lives Matter movement? How have community needs increased? Do we need to change how we operate? Can we continue with business as usual? And then importantly, what is our change process? Okay, next slide, please. So we want to close with just some very specific things. And we're happy, Mel and I, to take questions on everything we've bullet pointed. But I just want to give you a few ideas, like what to do now. So, oh, guess what the first one is? Talk to your donors and funders. Be clear in defining your needs. Evaluate your fundraising priorities and adjust based on community demand and the cost to deliver services or advocate. Next slide, please. Collaborate and partner. So emerging organizations, we just suggest collaborate, look for other emerging organizations to collaborate with, as well as established organizations, because there's just strength in that collaboration. And for established organizations, we say there is an increased priority on partnering with emerging organizations, and especially partnering with, at this time, organizations that are reaching those most affected by COVID-19, that are helping communities survive through this and then to rebuild, and especially to partner with organizations that are Black-led and Black-serving. If you don't have a certain capacity or knowledge, or you're not reaching or serving certain communities, partnering allows you to expand your relationships and expand into your mission and to learn and grow in partnership with those who have relationships and expertise. So it's a very important time to remember we're a community, whether it's locally, regionally, nationally. We are not competing against each other. Look to partner. And then when it comes to fundraising, what to do now? Ask for services and resources in addition to money. Look at what you need and what can be provided through in-kind services as opposed to a line item cost in your budget, and ask for those things. And then do your research. Know who to ask and how much to ask for. That's always a very important fundraising fundamental. Again, don't go it alone. Build a fundraising team. Critically important, ask for the gift, say thank you, and create opportunities for engagement. I think that's it. I think we have a thank you slide, and we have our 4 books
I can't wait to show that one.
Okay.
So I know it's not, it's like asking an author what's their favorite book is like asking a parent who's their favorite child, but what's the book that you see a lot of people
prerequisites for fundraising success, Mark. That's our top seller.
Is it?
Absolutely. But we're very proud of the new book just to come out about a month ago on building board relationships and getting the best out of your board.
I know that's the one I'm digging into on my Kindle. So yeah, that's good. Great. Well, thank you guys so much. And we've got questions coming in. So just a reminder to everybody that as you know, go to Saad&Shaw.com, check out Mel and Pearl on Amazon, and we're going to talk shop with some of the real questions that are coming in about all these things. But one thing I wondered, Mel and Pearl, are you seeing, as the pandemic happened and then the amazing outpouring around the horrific death of George Floyd, are you seeing capital campaigns? How are you seeing them manage this? I know there were some that were about to launch, some that were in process. What are you seeing them do, or what are you advising they do?
Well, I haven't seen anybody putting on the brakes. You know, they're basically out there, as Pearl had mentioned in the early remarks, they're asking questions, they're talking to their funders, they're talking to their board members, and they're talking internally. Those organizations who have been in the process of building their campaign, building the infrastructure, capacity, they're staying with it. And then not only to get buy-in internally that this is the way we want to go, and then talking outside to say, how do you feel? Can we continue with this? And at this point, unless I'm missing something, I haven't heard anybody say, no, let's put on the brakes. Other words, just strengthen what they're doing and be ready to go. Hopefully, when this is over, everybody feels optimistic that this is going to pass over, and when it does, we're going to be ready to go.
Some people, I'm a little concerned in Greenville, South Carolina, that some people are a little, they feel like we're maybe having the second wave, and we really haven't had the first wave with the rising numbers we're having here. So it's weird. But so what do you, when you talk about that, I've seen a lot of well-intentioned board members, and I love board members. They're so generous with their time, and this is something that's voluntary. They don't have to do it. And I am one, so I'm putting on my board member hat. Sometimes when we're on the board, we make really bad decisions for nonprofits. And one of the things that pumping the brakes is one of the things I've heard board members saying, oh, we can't possibly ask people at this time. We have to be respectful. We have to wait and come back when the economy comes back. How would you help people, nonprofit staff, navigate around that? What do you, it doesn't sound like you're having that with your clients, but with others, there must be people that you're in your circle. I know there are people in our circle that do that, are having that issue.
Right. I think it's important to ask. And I think that you will see changes in the market in terms of how foundations are impacted going forward, but also they're looking, many are looking at, should we release funds from our endowment? Should we increase the payout to compensate for anticipated decreased market losses and increased need? So, and then individuals, you have to remember, while many, many, many millions and millions of people are suffering and have lost their jobs, that is absolutely true. And yet there are so many people who still have more than enough and who are actually eager to give. And with capital campaigns, we know that you're typically talking with those who have capacity and who you have a relationship with. So we say, please talk to your donors, and you ask them, what's different for you? Are things changing? We talked to you earlier. We understood you were interested in what we're doing. How do you feel today? So ask, but don't put the brakes on things. I think you can also look at reports that have come out in the past week that both individual and institutional giving is just going through the roof because people are responding. We are a feeling people, all of us, we're more than numbers and data. People are feeling, they're feeling the crisis of the moment, and they are opening their wallets with small gifts and large gifts.
But Mark, I would equally suggest that the CEO would also talk individually to your board members through this. We just can't take them for granted. You got to stop and ask each one of them, where are you personally? What do you think we should do? And hopefully throughout that process that you get buy-in, or you might have to say, maybe we do need to alter. But we can't just assume that either they're not with us or they're with us, but to constantly talk to them offline mainly, so that because you know how in a group dynamic they're going to go one way, but you want to make sure that you got the pulse of each of the individual board members moving forward.
That's a really good point, to talk to them individually offline. I like to contextualize that by saying that way the introverts get as much time as the extroverts, but it does also help mitigate groupthink. That's for sure. That's good.
Sure.
One of the questions we have that came in early, which was great, and reminder, questions and answers, just feel free to use that to share ask your questions, or use the chat box. Is how do we navigate differences in our team with our donors and with our board when we communicate particularly about Black Lives Matter? It's very important to our staff and maybe our beneficiaries that we make a public and vocal stand, but our board and our donors span the political spectrum, and so the organization's been nervous as to how to handle that.
Okay, well, it is a time of reckoning, and I'll be honest with you, we face that all the time, every day, and we face it in our professional life, and many people, Black people, are telling you over and over, they're saying to America and the world, hey, our lives matter. So it's not a risk that people are taking. It's a call to people's humanity. When you live in a culture that has been, white dominant, and, everything is shaped by the white lens, that's a fact. You know, some people profit from it. It's a fact, but it is okay. It's a time to ask for change. It's a time to take what in the past might have been thought of as a risk, and it's a time to stand up for values. And that part is risky. But think about how many people are risking their lives right now by making their voices heard in a time of COVID-19, because they're saying this is critical. We have to look at ourselves and look at our priorities and look at what we invest in. And people may leave the table and other people may come to the table. But if you have an organization that's based on respect and partnership, you can have those discussions, and don't feel afraid to ask and reach out for others to help guide you in how to have those conversations. Because they can be difficult, because racism is something that we just don't talk about. It's not on the agenda. It's in the room, it's operating, but whether we see it or not, it's there. So I'm turning it over to Mel. There's just a lot that can be said on that, and I appreciate the person that raised the question, because it's real, very real.
Well, just to piggyback on what Pearl is saying, I just think all organizations at this point need to stop and look at your culture. It might not be where everybody think you should be, but start somewhere. If you just start with one person at a time, whether it's a board member or a staff member, how do we begin to talk and work together to operate so that our institution and the culture of our institution can embrace these issues that's facing us? Because to try to do it all with one strategy, that's not going to be enough. Just find out what works for your institution versus trying to keep up and adopt all of the things that are out here, because there are going to be so many ideas, so many ways to do that. But again, go back and look at what's the comfort zone for your institution.
Thank you. I know I was talking to one executive director last week who thought she was being really progressive, and until the last few weeks, because she had an all-female board. And then it was just as she was watching the protest on TV, she actually went to her website and looked at the board, and she and all the women on the board are white. And she realized, wow, now I know where I have to go. And so then it's the wrestling between, I want you here for your expertise, not just because you're filling a quota, but I also want to be more representative of the people we serve and the community we work with. So how there's so many, I thank you for that. And forgive me if I mess up, cisgendered white male.
That was the thing that I was just going to say, is that we all live with fear, am I going to say the right thing in so many aspects of our life? And you know what? We're not always going to say the right thing. And people can feel intimidated. Oh, we live in a call-out culture, but people are asking the most from those in leadership. So we step up, and when we make mistakes and move on. But I don't think.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the things that's hardest that I've seen in a lot of the conversations that I've been part of in the last 2 weeks in particular, it is going to be uncomfortable for people that haven't had the conversation already. And so just know that. And it was particularly for white people. I was listening to an AFP town hall yesterday. There's going to be discomfort, and welcome to the world. The world is uncomfortable. So one of the questions that doesn't pertain to this was there were 4 points on a slide, and so I'll just let you know you'll get access to the PDF of the slide. I'm not going to fire it up again, only because I'm not sure I can. So I think I can, but I want to keep the conversation going. So you will get access to the PDF right on the same page that this recording is on. There's a question here that says about asking, what are your thoughts on how organizations can acknowledge and honor movements like Black Lives Matter without making them look like they're trying to shift their organization to take advantage of the moment? I know a lot of people had the same problem with COVID-19. They didn't want to feel like they were capitalizing on somebody's hardship. So are there tips on that, being relevant without looking like you're shifting?
Well, I
wondering?
think the thing, first of all, is to make sure that you have the comfort zone and the buy-in within the institution versus going out painting billboards to say, look how great we're in and all that. I don't think that's necessary. I think just to make sure that you have a system and a complete buy-in by all parties concerned. And then at some point, you need to organize to say, who will be the advocate of what we're doing? You know, are we going to do, how are we going to do this? How are we going to get the word out? But to make sure that everybody's in sync, that this is the way we're going to do it, versus trying to copy your neighbor and your nonprofit down the street, or trying to compete with who's going to make the loudest noise and that kind of thing. But to really look inwardly to say, and who would be the person or people in our organization who's going to make the case for us in terms of our commitment to the cause. So I'm very concerned about how organized you are, who's going to be making a statement for the organization, and what statements are going to be made so that everybody will be in sync. And if there is an issue where you have to defend, everybody know why you defending or the stand that you're taking at this point, versus having our people going from all different directions in order to be seen and be heard. But are you being heard in the right way?
Thank you. Another question here is, our organization is Frontline COVID-19 Responder, and we have raised more money than ever in the past 3 months, $50 million when their annual budget's normally $15 million.
Whoa.
Yeah, congratulations. But we have other needs, especially with the new Ebola outbreak in the DRC and hurricane season's now opening up. How much do we ask even more? How do we ask for even more when people have already given so much? Fears that everyone is given to COVID, there won't be funds for other programs that still need the support.
No, you make your case. So the case for giving to respond to the impacts of COVID-19, that's great, as appropriate, and according to how your organization is run. You can direct if that's allowed under your bylaws, depending how did you solicit the money. Is it in a general operating, or is it COVID specific? You may be able to move some of those funds depending on how they were solicited and the extent to which they're restricted. But other situations continue. And so whatever the plans were for fundraising for hurricanes and other situations, you need to continue with those. I think you can also tell the story of how you've been responding to COVID-19 as an example of your strength as an organization in responding and meeting needs. But absolutely, you have to go out there.
That's
and
great.
You have to stay with your fundraising priorities that have been established, because it's always going to be a crisis. And so you can't, every time a crisis pop up, you're going to give up everything that you planned for. So stay with your given priorities that's in your case, what you're selling to the marketplace, with the idea that people know that there are always going to be things that you did not count for. And they'll be sympathetic and understand that's a need that you did not plan for.
I think that's a great, yeah, I love that. Talking to some fundraisers in the past 3 months who have felt like they're, for the first time in their life, the shutdown has helped them actually be the fundraisers that they're supposed to be. They're calling their donors, they're talking to their donors, and they're giving their donors multiple times. Some people were doing a coronavirus emergency appeal every 3 weeks or so. And instead of artificially making the decision for donors that they're only going to be an annual donor because we're going to only ask them once a year, they're finding out donors were thrilled to be giving multiple times for the same, basically the same ask, but they felt like they were making a difference because the communications were so good.
Absolutely.
Pearl, how would you share some of that impact with rapid asking? Are there some things that you like teaching in communication so that we, I think, artificially limit the number of asks that we do, especially in direct mail fundraising or direct response fundraising? Are there ways that you've found that people can tell their donors, you're doing great work, thanks for doing this, and prep them for an ask that's coming in the next week or so?
Yeah, absolutely. Keep on with your strategy, and as appropriate, accelerate it. I do think what was embedded in the question is telling people what you're doing, letting them know how you're responding, because that encourages people to give. People want to give to if it comes to emergency fundraising, they want to give to organizations that they see are actually getting the money out and making an impact. So absolutely do that. And I think always it's visually as well as with words, and keep your message short with the opportunity to go someplace for more detailed information. And I think that part is critically important, because yes, there's impulse giving, but there's also people who are looking at appeals. If they're considering a larger gift, they're not going to make it based on the content of a direct mail or an online appeal. So you always want to link to or reference a source that has more detailed information about your programs, your response, how you're moving forward, someone to contact for a longer discussion, because otherwise you're shutting out people who might give at a response that's much higher than the targeted audience.
Thank you. Another question there, keep coming in. This is, there's a comment in the comment part of, we all need to be genuine. Thanks for the excellent presentation. You are an encouragement. Thank you for doing this webinar.
Yay.
So, yeah.
That must be my cousin. That must be my cousin.
I didn't want to say that the name sounded familiar. No. Whoa, my COVID hair is going nuts. All right. So another question is, I'm a development officer, major gifts officer for a nascent community-based community center in downtown Oakland. We have a huge 45,000 square foot former church space in a neighborhood in transition. Oakland has the highest coronavirus numbers in Northern California. Our neighborhood is the center of Black Lives Matters protests, which we fully support. There are some resistance to us because we are at the epicenter of these things. In our fundraising, should we directly acknowledge these dynamics or downplay the dynamics, or what would you recommend in their making their case?
First, we want to say we love Oakland. We're from the Bay Area. We spent, I spent 30 years, Mel spent 20 years in the Bay Area. So we last lived in Oakland before moving to Memphis. So we love you, Oakland.
We started our business in Oakland.
Yeah, we love Oakland. And Oakland has a long history of being out there and asking in the forefront for progressive causes. So a coordinated ask. I think it's also important to be in touch with people who are leading the different grassroots organizations that surround you, that if you're looking to make some large asks, that you look at what are your partnership type asks that you could make. Think of yourselves as stronger in numbers, but it is critically important to make the case. And if we haven't answered that fully, I had a little difficulty understanding the specific of the question. So if the person who asked it wants more response, they could ask another question or just call us and we'll be happy to talk to them, because I'm not sure that we answered that the way they wanted it.
Great. Okay. Well, I appreciate your humbleness in that as well. Another question is, how can we make and this is now a sector-wide question, how can we look at our sector as a whole and examine the systemic racism and inequalities we perpetuate within nonprofit organizations, conferences, and fundraisings? In particular, how can our conference in particular, I guess it says right here, create spaces for these conversations? Well, I would submit, I think we are in this way, but it's not going fast enough, for sure. We want to fundraise effectively and combat racism within ourselves and our practices. Are you seeing organizations and spaces that are doing this well?
Well, I think for minority organizations, that's always the top of the subject matter.
Okay.
The issue would be how do you organize, and as Pearl mentioned earlier, how do you partner with other organizations that not necessarily have to be Black organizations? How do you partner with the community as a whole to deal with these issues versus you trying to take on this burden by yourself? I would start small and you build your case, develop what you're selling, bring in partners who have like-minded and say, this is how we're going to work together to make sure that the word is passed out. A lot of organizations feel like they have to take the burden on by themselves. I don't think that's healthy at this time. The key issue is to certainly talk about your space and how you would like to proceed, but also can you bring in others to work with you, or develop a joint kind of statement that we can work together to send the message out to the marketplace.
Wow.
I want to build on that. So, and I felt we tried to embed that in the beginning part of the presentation, which is to ask for an organization-wide conversation, because it really is about saying, hey, who are we? How did we come to be who we are? Whose needs are we meeting? What needs are we not seeing? Whose voices are we not hearing? And to begin that process, I think there are also a lot of coaches that work with organizations around issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm saying that to hire a coach. If you want to be successful and you feel that this is an area that you're not yet equipped to have a conversation and move an agenda, hire someone with expertise. Don't be afraid to pay a person of color to work with you and teach you. And I think that's really important, instead of like calling up my Black friends and asking them, what should I do? Pay for the expertise. You pay for accounting expertise, you pay for fundraising expertise, marketing. And I think more and more what's happening is we're just being pushed. We've had a break for 400 years, and now the pedal is on the metal that, you know, this is not an equitable world, and white privilege it's just everywhere. So we can uncover it and move forward. But you need to look at it and have the conversation and look at your case, look at your people, and ask others to help you. And everybody, y'all can have the conversation. We're all capable. We're capable.
And for those of you who may not, are still wrestling with, is white privilege real? The way it was put to me years ago was, who has to earn respect in your organization? Somebody walks in the room, who has to do their time and earn respect? 48 years on the planet, I have walked into most situations and not had to do that. And that's because of 400 years of systems that have been put into place to white men are seen as more likely to have something to say, which is baloney. I mean, we're all human beings, but it's also something that that's the form of white privilege that I've heard that kind of sunk in with, wow, we have a responsibility here. So I hope that, yeah. So
we have some, I just want to just take a plug to say, we talk about this within the context of fundraising. And again, as everybody knows, it's delicate because they're like, oh, they're always pushing the race thing, you know, and clearly what we're talking about is being an effective organization. So you can look at the website. We have a whole video about the issue of diversity and fundraising that was done for AFP, and there's different columns in there and blog posts and suggestions. So we just wanted to say, we can all do it. We can all grow. Absolutely.
And I've also heard from a number of these conversations that it's on white people to learn, because we can't, like you were saying, Pearl, it's not on us calling our Black friends saying, oh my goodness, what do I do? Or white shame. I'm so sorry that we've been oppressed for centuries. So it's a lot, there's a lot of good work. If you look at the New York Times bestseller list at the time of this recording, most of the books are on diversity and inclusion and have really good helps on being an anti-racist and all. So we can educate ourselves and hire people like Saad&Shaw, I know Erica Hines and Desiree Attaway have been doing some amazing work in DE&I, and there's a ton of others, which I'm sure I just dissed, and I apologize for that. Our friend from Oakland thanks you. So he said that was helpful. There's some good conversation in the questions too about, and I'm honored that they're asking, and I'm not sure how, if I'm going to summarize it well, but it's basically reflecting on the fact that board members tend to be recruited from other board members. So as we expand the diversity on our boards, it'll probably become more expansive if we're doing diversity and inclusion right. But the questions seem to be centered around, how do we get diverse? Is that even a fair question? I mean, what's the right way to word that?
Well, I'll start with the basic premise in terms of the ideal board for me would be, and what we recommend to our client, the first board, there are three things. They need to be a person of wealth. Let me repeat that. Of wealth. Let me repeat that one more time.
Could you say that again?
Power and influence. And we're saying that can be any color, but that person needs to have those fundamental things surrounding them. And certainly you need to have diversity. And we do find a lot of the boards are either they're all black or they're all white. And so we look at this issue not only in terms of how do we deal with our white brothers and sisters, but we also have to deal with our own brothers and sisters and say, we can't operate alone. We have to work together. We have to bring people certain skills, culture, background, but more than anything, money and influence to help you move your organization forward. So it's a two-way street, and we try to drum that into our clients to say we have to find diversity and all join together and make it work to understand their roles and responsibility as well as ours, and hopefully that we can come to in the middle and make it work for the good of the organization.
I just want to add one thing to that, which would be just if you're looking at changing the composition of your board or your organization, to the extent that you can, bring on 2 or 3 people of color at a time. Don't bring one person in, because then just the force of the culture is against them. You want to bring people in a cohort, and you know, people know, like, oh yeah, they want me on that board because they need somebody black. You know, they need a Muslim. They need a, you know, Asian American. You know, the people know when you're asking them because you're a diversity board member. So look at you on board members, like Melvin said, power, wealth, and influence, people with expertise, people who actually have a real commitment to your organization. That's what you're bringing them on for.
I also like to piggyback on what Pearl said. When you invite this individual, make sure that you're inviting them in a meaningful way to let them know this is the type of person we want. This will be your roles and responsibility. This is what is expected of you. And not just a blanket thing, well, we need 2 black people on the board, we need 3 white people on the board, come on over and join us. No, you want to really spell out clearly what will be their role and responsibility and their skill set and why we need you to help advance this organization.
At the risk of also screwing up, is it okay to say that we value this about you, you bring this expertise to the table, and we're pretty homogenous and we need to shake things up?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, you guys, I'm so glad we get the tag team going. This is really good. I'm so glad both of you were able to join us. We are coming to the end of our time, I know. There's the others, kind of the theme of questions are, I think, going back to fundamentals. It's how do we take our story that we know so well and make it appear relevant, not appear relevant, but make it relevant, make it timely. I think one of the things that irritated me early on in the pandemic was so many nonprofits kind of leaning back saying, well, we're not relevant right now. We're not essential. That's what it was. We're not essential services. But to the donors that liked that museum or wanted to fund that symphony, they were essential to those donors' lives. So how are there ways that you have found working with clients to help them kind of get out of their own way and think about funding in the midst of the conversations that are happening?
Yeah, I think you have to talk about what's happening. So if we were to just look at COVID here and you had a campaign, say it's a capital campaign for a museum or a college, talk to those donors and tell them, you know, right now, you know, our premises are not open. Our campus is closed, or, you know, our exhibit space is closed. What we've done to shift and retain our audience and to keep our employees and our visitors safe is we're now doing X, Y, and Z. We anticipate we're going to continue doing that for the next 4 months. We've looked at our budgets. We're retaining our staff because we feel they really are the asset of who we are. But we have noticed that some of our costs of, you know, serving and educating have reduced in this area. You know, we talked to you 4 months ago about this upcoming campaign. we believe that it's still what the institution needs. And I'm hoping that you'll stay with us. We know you've been a long-term supporter. We want to talk to you about what we're doing now, but we do see our institution continuing in the future. We hope that you'll stay with us. We want to have the timing of your gift to meet with your priorities. But see, the idea is just that you talk about what are you doing now. Don't hide from the reality. You're obviously doing something, so just talk about it.
I love that. I always believe honesty and integrity are two of the most important skills in the it's fundraiser's toolbox. And I love the way that you gave so many nuggets. Fortunately, we're recording this because there are a lot of phrases that Pearl just said that will be helpful in, our people are our most important asset. That's why we've kept them, and they're all so good. Mel, it looked like you were going to jump into.
Oh, no. While Pearl is on the roll, I'm going to step back. No, that's great.
Having just celebrated my 25th anniversary, I understand and respect that entirely. That's great. Super. Well, are there any parting words that I want everybody to say thank you in the chat for all of you that are listening. We'll have a recording of this posted on the site. Go to Saad&Shaw.com and spelled out to check out the work that Pearl and Mel are doing. Go to Amazon and check out their name to check out their books. I know they also have Fund You, which is a place of courses that they have. YouTube, they also have conversations with folks like Pearl mentioned earlier that they've been recording on YouTube and having with their podcast. Any parting words that you want to make sure, any questions that we should have asked or parting words that you'd like to get out to people?
Well, I would like for most people to stay focused. If you have developed your major gift program or your capital campaign, hopefully that's come out of your strategic planning, that you will stay focused. And then if there is room for you to make an adjustment to meet the needs of what the community is asking for at this time, great. But yet maintain and build your capacity and infrastructure, because once it's over, you still have to meet those needs that you're planning for. So don't just jump and change the whole outlook of your fundraising program because of the pressures that you see around you. And that's my thoughts for today.
I just say we need you no matter what your role is. If you're on this call, we need you, meaning just everybody. We need you. You're up to the task, and this is not a sprint. This is a marathon. We know that fundraising for major gifts and capital campaigns is not something that you just wake up one day and you say you're going to do it. And you do a lot of planning. It takes a period of time. You build relationships. The same thing with rebuilding and transforming organizations to more adequately and equitably address needs. It's not done overnight, so don't worry about it. We're going to get there. We'll all get there together.
Wow. Well, thank you. There's tons of thank yous. So much appreciation for you guys in the chat and in the questions. People are posting thank yous as well. Really appreciate your giving your time here. Remember, Saad&Shaw.com. And for those of you that had quite even more coming in. Yeah, this was great. For those of you that had questions about how do you tell the story well, the conference has free review Fridays. If you Google free review Fridays, Stephen Shattuck actually reviews your mailing pieces that you send him. And Stephen Shattuck, from our friends from Bloomerang who make these things possible. But Stephen Screen from Better Fundraising Company will review them on screen and tell you what you did wrong and what you did right. And he's got a wonderful way of doing it with a heart, because he respects the fact that it takes guts to put your story out there to be reviewed in front of thousands of people. And also, if you go to the Nonprofit Storytelling Conference, you can go through and there's a special package on all the different videos from the past conferences, so you can see all the years and all the different stories and teachers that we've had over the years to help you really kind of get to that nugget of connecting with donors and still funding your mission. Not, as Mel was saying, because you have a special COVID, a fund or something. I would not advise that. It's because you have a mission that responds to the community and is needed now more than ever. So thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. Mel and Pearl, thank you so much. Really looking forward to doing this again in the future.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.